It's the IDP show, now you know.
Welcome to the IDP show. I'm your host, Josh Raymer. It is the Week 16 recap episode. A little bit different this week. Addie was out this week with some family stuff and work stuff. I'm actually getting over a stomach bug, so did not want to have Bobo exposed and risk him being sick, but still wanted to get something for you all in the podcast feed and for our YouTube audience. So I've got a recap episode for you all, 6 of the biggest storylines from Week 16, the semifinals for most fantasy leagues. We also had talked about on Twitter doing a Dynasty discussions segment. We're going to bump that to next week so we can discuss those Dynasty assets with Adam and Bobby. But hopefully you all are advancing into your fantasy championships. And if you want some start-sit advice, we got the weekly preview episode with Jace Abbey and the Green Dot King, Mike Wohlert. It is available over in your podcast feed and on YouTube as you're watching this and listening to it. So go check it out. And then if you have questions about your lineups, we'll, of course, have the Sunday morning live stream. Jeff Pomazal, Jake Colhagen taking care of those lineup questions for you Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Central. So make sure to check that out. Mike Wohlert's rankings just went live early on the website. So all the resources you need are right there, but we wanted to give you all a little something in the podcast feed and on YouTube to recap Week 16, even though we're a little bit hobbled and a little shorthanded this week. So let's kick things off. One of our favorite players, I would argue, should be the defensive MVP for the NFL, or I guess defensive player of the year, Andrew Van Ginkel, the long-haired beauty from the Minnesota Vikings. It's been a few weeks since we talked up AVG, so let's do it now. He is currently tied for 6th in the NFL for sacks with his own teammate, Jonathan Grenard. How crazy is it that you let go Danielle Hunter, who's having a great season in Houston, and you don't even miss him because you absolutely nail the Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard signings, and both of those guys have managed to stay healthy. You have Pat Jones as a nice edge 3 kicking in there, as well as, Dallas Turner, your first-round pick. So an embarrassment of riches at edge for the Vikings. But AVG got 2 more sacks against the Seahawks. He came through in a big way for you, collecting his 7th 20-plus point game of the season by Big 3 scoring, situating him as the DL1 overall, headed into Week 17. Now, that said, the Green Bay Packers, his opponent for Week 17, not a great matchup for opposing defensive linemen. That's something that Mike and Jace talk about in the preview episode, so go over there, check it out. Obviously, if you're in a start 3 or 4 DL league, you're not going to sit AVG down. But if you're in one of those leagues where maybe you start 1, you may have some decisions on your hands when it comes to AVG. Personally, I like the idea, as Bobo likes to say, dance with the girl you brought. AVG has brought you to this point. I would be rolling him out there, but if you have better options because of the matchup, it may be worth looking at setting AVG down so you don't have a dud in your championship week. Next up, a guy who started hot, cooled off a little bit in the middle of the season, but now is in fuego once again. It is one of Addie's favorite players. Kyle Van Noy has reignited at the perfect time. He was a top 5 DL through the first 4 weeks of the season with 6 sacks. Then he fell off a cliff, collecting just 1 sack in the next 7 weeks. I feel that because I have Kyle Van Noy on my IDP Madness squad. That's all changed back again with KVN managing to get back in the flames and pick up 3.5 sacks in his last 3 games to give him a red-hot 18.55 points per game. We know Addy is over the moon with 2 of his babies, getting it done when the chips are down. Kyle Van Noy, another player that Mike and Jace are going to talk about in that preview episode, so make sure you go check that out to see what they have to say about Kyle Van Noy headed into Week 17. But good to see Kyle Van Noy heating up when it matters most. This is what a lot of veterans do. There are lags and lulls throughout the season. Like we've talked about before, the NFL season is a short sample size, a small sample size relative to other sports leagues like baseball and basketball. Only 17 games in the regular season. That's a really small sample size, and variance can wreak absolute havoc, especially a defensive line where a lot of your production comes down to sacks, and sacks are very fluky. But good to see Kyle Van Noy turning it on when it matters most. Let's move to another edge rusher, Micah Parsons, who has made himself a lot of money this season, even though he was out from weeks 2 through 4. There was a little dip there. People say, I'm tired of Micah Parsons. I don't want to deal with this anymore. Hopefully you're able to buy if some of your league mates were wanting to get off of Micah Parsons. I don't know that there's been a better edge or defensive lineman in the NFL since Micah Parsons came back. Remember, Nick Bosa got 5 years, $170 million deal at the beginning of 2024. And you kind of wonder, with Micah Parsons' contract looming, he's already talked about, hey, I want to be here in Dallas, but I wouldn't mind to go finish my career somewhere else. I understand the business side of the NFL. Obviously, we'd love to see him stay in Dallas. It seems like Mike McCarthy is going to be back. Jerry Jones has talked a lot about McCarthy's leadership here since they've been eliminated. So we'll see how that goes. Yes, Micah Parsons did start slow. People were trying to sell him based on the name value, but he has 8.5 of his 9.5 sacks since week 10. The Cowboys, yes, they're out of playoff contention, so they might shut it down. I don't think so. I think this team is still competing, and Mike McCarthy is fighting to keep that job. But if all the players are healthy, you don't see the random like calf injury or back injury or ankle injury knock these guys out when they're out of playoff contention. Micah Parsons will get Kenny Pickett in championship week, assuming Jalen Hurts does not clear concussion protocol. So that is pretty sweet. Micah Parsons, one of those elite dynasty assets, elite edge assets, one of those types of guys that you want to have, especially once he gets the big deal, because then we know he's secure. A little bit of ambiguity going into the offseason will definitely be one of the biggest storylines to track. Does Micah Parsons get paid? I think he will, and I think it will be a very big contract. Something that not a lot of us saw coming, because we wondered, Carolina shutting down a lot of their linebackers. Who will be the other linebacker there? There was some John Radigan buzz. Turns out it was Jacoby Windmon, who actually stepped in to fill the void vacated by, I think it was Goster Sherrillis and Trevin Wallace going on IR. I'll actually vet that to make sure I'm not just making those names up. But Jacoby Windmon, it was a quiet week for off-ball linebackers overall. Nobody scored more than 23.25 points per Big Three scoring. That was Caden Ellis, in case you were wondering. But one of the highlights at the position, though, in Week 16 was Panthers rookie Jacoby Windmon. He was the second linebacker deployed beside Josie Jewell and was replacing fellow rookie Trevin Wallace, mentioned, hit IR recently. He had 8 tackles and a sack on 76% of snaps. He is one of the players that Mike Wohlert wrote up in his waiver wire article this week. He says the Panthers lost 2 linebackers to IR. Who would be the one to step up and get snaps opposite Josie Jewell? Like we mentioned, word around Carolina, it was going to be John Radigan, but ended up being Windmon as the nickel LB. He looked like an undrafted free agent at times, but stood up well against Arizona. Again, 76% of snaps. Trevin Wallace, Claudin Cherylus on IR. He is in line to see similar usage rate in Week 17. If you need an LB, Windmon is looking like an LB 3 or 4. That from Mike Wollert's waiver article, which is now live on the IDPshow.com. So we talked about AVG, Kyle Van Noy coming through for managers when it mattered. Let's talk about some top linebackers who balled out. Now, we didn't have the 30, 40-point explosions in Week 16, so not the high heights that we're used to from some of our top linebackers throughout the season. But if you rolled out Caden Ellis, Frankie Louvu, Zach Bond, Blake Cashman, Kaiser White, they all smashed 20-plus points this past weekend. In fact, Zaire Franklin, TJ Edwards, Jamian Sherwood, and Christian Roseboom were the only healthy top 24 non-dual Desi linebackers who didn't score at least double-digit points in your semifinal matchup. And those are all great players that I think we're going to be rolling back out there with confidence for Week 17. So as much as IDP scoring has been depressed this season, some of the edge rushers have been bust simply because they've gotten hurt or the production hasn't been there. We have had a lot of linebacker options who have balled out consistently for us. And if you're wondering who's going to step in to replace some of these injured guys who are hitting IR or being shut down for the season, again, make sure to check out Mike's waiver article over at theidpshow.com. So as much as the top linebackers balled out for us, we had some stud defensive linemen let us down in a big spot in the semifinals. Offensive podcast, they'll talk about Jerry Jeudy, Joe Mixon, Jalen Hurts as being guys who might have lost fantasy players their matchups. Well, IDP is no different. You could have realistically started TJ Watt, Danielle Hunter, and Nick Bonito in a start 3 DL lineup and been counting your berth in the finals before kickoff. Well, except for the fact that the DL 2, 4, and 6 combined for 10 total points. Add in Brian Burns as the DL 8 who put up 5.5 points. You're looking at less than 16 points from 4 of the top 10 defensive linemen. That happens, y'all. As you all know, as well as we do, if you play this game that we love and hate for any amount of time, fantasy is a coin flip from week to week. IDP more so than regular, but commiserations to anyone who missed a championship shot because of these guys. Now, again, if you want to know what to do with some of these stud defensive linemen, be sure to check out Jace and Mike's podcast looking at the Week 17 preview. They go over a ton of guys, not just their favorite starts and some guys that they're fading for Week 17, but also some other matchups to target and avoid at all 3 position groups, defensive line, linebacker, and defensive back. So again, a little bit different episode this week. Wish we could have brought you all a full episode, but the chips were stacked against us. But we still wanted to get something out for you all in the podcast feed and on YouTube. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out the website, theidpshow.com. Like I mentioned, all of Mike's articles are already up. The green dot linebacker, the waiver wire, the rankings. We've got Johnny the Greek's cornerback corner going out in about 2 hours as I sit here recording this, so that'll be up early for you. We're trying to get everything out to you all in advance of the Netflix games on Christmas Day tomorrow. Speaking of, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to all of you. Myself, Adam, and Bobby hope to be back here in the shack breaking down championship week for you all. Like I said, we'll have that dynasty discussion segment next week. So continue to send in those players, and we'll continue to add them to the list. Anyone that you can't quite figure out in dynasty, send it to us. We'll break it down on the show next week. But thank you all for rocking with us all season. This is it. This is the time. If you made it to your championship game, now is the time to lock in and bring home that title, and we're going to help you do that. But thank you all so much for checking this out, for listening, for watching. Merry Christmas. We'll see y'all next week.
It's the IDP show. Now you know